Hi, this is Brandon I. Brooks with the Los Angeles Sentinel newspaper, also the LA Times newspaper. It's also my pleasure today to be representing the NNPA, which is the National Newspaper Publisher Association. Well, thank you very much, Isiah Thomas, to be sitting here with us today.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to this conversation as you're doing many great things with basketball, but outside of basketball. And that's our focus today, is a lot of the work that you're doing across America, but also in your hometown, Chicago. So I think we'll start there, and we'll wind up into some more things. Why don't you tell me about your Windy City Hoops program? You're doing a lot of work in Chicago, your hometown. I think you've partnered up with the mayor, Rob Emanuel. But why don't you tell me a little bit about that program and some of the work you're doing?
Yeah, it's a program basically to attract kids and youth from the ages of 13 to 17, bring them into the Park District, and introduce them to the game of basketball and team sport. And what we found that in introducing kids or youth into sport and play, they really get to know each other, they get to bond, they get to connect. But so many times when we think about basketball, we only think about the score of the game.
Yeah.
But the things that come around basketball, the coaches that you meet, the mentors that you have, the educational resources that come along with that, the tutoring aspect that comes around that basketball game, and just the wisdom that comes from people who come to the game watching you play. So that whole type of interaction, when we talk about it takes a village to raise a child, well, that type of communication that comes around the sport is what we all were attracted to. I mean, you were telling me earlier that you played the position, you played the point guard, and I'm sure it just wasn't your mom and dad telling you to go to school. You had a coach who was reinforcing that message that was coming from the household. Not only did you have a coach that was reinforcing that message that was coming from the household, there was a friend of a coach who was saying, look, you got to make sure you stay in school. Oh, young blood, let me tell you. And so those are the things that come around the sport. And by taking sport and play out of all communities, by closing the park districts, by taking sport and play out of school, only the athletes now really get a chance and the opportunity to have that type of dialogue with those coaches, with those mentors. What we want to do is open it up and give it back to everybody. So we want the community to come back, we want the neighborhoods to come back, and by putting sport and play back into the community, putting it back into the neighborhood, kids will get to know each other, and once they get to know each other, we think it's hard for them to kill each other.
Let's talk about that. And in your focus, this program, is it just in Chicago primarily right now? The Windy City Hoops program, is it going to travel across the nation, or what's kind of the expectations of this?
Well, sport and play travels, and not only does it travel domestically, it travels internationally. So, and we have a park district in every city. We have several park districts in every city. So when you think about the vision and the expansion of this program in terms of just a fully operating park district, that the swimming pool is open, the baseball diamonds are used, the football field is used, the soccer field is used, the basketball courts are used. You got all the kids in the community now gathering in one spot, coming to play. And when they come, they bring their parents. Some of their parents may be educators, they may be lawyers, so forth and so on. So now you're getting everybody in one spot, everybody's starting to communicate. Again, when you take sport and play out of the community, it really limits the communication, and the only time you get a chance to interact or communicate with somebody is at school. But there's no talking in the classroom, right?
Exactly.
So how do we get to know each other?
I wanted to ask you, when did this kind of trigger that you knew that you had to do something, that you personally had to step up and put a program together or get with other persons that are powerful in the city of Chicago to really make a difference and affect the youth personally and get to them? What triggered and just told you that? Was it the recent deaths going on in Chicago, the violence now? It's been going on for years, but what happened?
No, this has basically been my role, all my life.
Wow.
And this is what my mother did. My mother, when Fred Hampton was in Chicago, my mother worked for Fred Hampton.
Wow.
When Martin Luther King and Malcolm X visited the west side of Chicago. My mother marched with him, So my mother was an activist, and she raised activists, and our job was to always speak out and speak up about the injustice that we saw in our communities. And my basketball career, I've always used that platform to speak out on social justice causes. And as far back as when I was in Detroit playing, when I was at Indiana, or even when I was in high school, this has always been my mission. So, I believe that with education, particularly for African Americans, it requires you to be an activist. It requires you to speak out. And, that's what my mother taught. That's what she believed in. They named a street after her in Chicago on the West Side. Wow. And, for all her work that she's done and that we were doing, she was honored for it. And we talk about gangs and everything else right now, and but I remember when the Vice Lords and the Black Panthers and everyone was on the West Side of Chicago, it wasn't about killing each other. It wasn't about selling drugs to each other. It was about protecting the community, and it was about sending positive messages to the community about education, about family, about coming together. It was never about how we kill each other.
Yeah. Let's talk more about your relationship with your mother. I think that's something that we shouldn't just graze over, because you were sharing with me a little earlier how important education was with you for basically your entire life. You left Indiana early, the university, but I think you said you signed a contract with your mom that you promised her you were going to finish school. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
It was a contract I reluctantly signed.
Well, and this was before, like when you signed your letter, you had to sign the contract. Give us the details.
Well, again, my mother is from that generation that believed and fought for education. There was a time in this country where African Americans, you went to jail for reading a book. You were incarcerated if you tried to, teach education or try to be educated. So she comes from that thought, and her whole mission, just like a lot of African Americans' mission was at that time, was to make sure that this generation and generations beyond have access to education. Basketball was, again, the thing that got the most light, so to speak. But inside my household, inside our community, when they talk about Isiah Thomas, they talk about me as a graduate of Indiana University and someone who's completing their master's now at Berkeley. Then they talk about the basketball stuff, But when I decided to leave Indiana University after winning the championship in 1981 to pursue a professional career, my mother made sure that I understood that you can leave college basketball to play N.B.A. basketball, but you're not leaving college. And I was like, what you mean?
Like, I'm done. I'm leaving.
Like, no, you got to go to summer school and finish. Wow. So
you never stopped?
I never stopped. And back then, they didn't have internet courses because there was no internet.
Oh, wow.
So we took what we call correspondence courses. So I was taking 2 classes during the season, writing papers, going to games, taking tests. As a matter of fact,
so Isiah Thomas is studying on the bus before the big game?
Yes, that's exactly what I was doing.
Wow, that's smart.
It took me 4 years actually to complete the 2 years that I left behind. Graduated in 1986, 87, and it was actually on Mother's Day. That little clip where they show me dancing around, holding the ball after making the shot. Wow. Well, that was Mother's Day. We beat the Atlanta Hawks on Mother's Day. I made the last shot to win the game, and my mother was graduating on stage, getting a diploma with the cap and gown, and that was it.
Wow. We'll switch gears. You're receiving an award for your humanitarian work. Why don't you share what that means, what the award's for, and share us, why this award is being bestowed upon you.
Well, the award is for just doing good work in the community with at-risk kids, and I was one of those at-risk kids, and also foster kids. And it really is just about giving back and,
Yeah.
Being present, showing up. So many times you can write the check and you never know who that check is helping. Well, I was the beneficiary of one of those checks that a person never saw. That person who wrote the check didn't see me. I'd probably never met him or her. But their contribution on that day stopped me from going to jail, because what it probably did was made sure that I was able to get something to eat, or the coach was able to buy a uniform, or the coach was able to rent a van and drive us to the game. And those little things matter. So what I've tried to do is just continue to give back, continue to be a part of the community that I'm from, and just try to shine a light on good people. And poverty is not, you can't arrest poverty.
Yeah.
And just because we are living in poverty, and just because we are not as fortunate as some, does not necessarily mean that we're criminals or gangbangers or what have you. So the labeling theory that goes on around poverty, I try to speak to that also.
You have a quote of saying, education is the way out of poverty, and I think that's very powerful. Can you, kind of add on to that and tell us, what do you really mean? I mean, obviously, education's a way out, but some people might say, what am I going to do? It doesn't give me money right away, so, I mean, there's not a job to get. But I think I understand a little bit more, but why don't you share us, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm only regurgitating what I was taught. And again, that generation before us, that's what they staunchly believed, and it has proven to be true and accurate. There are more you than there are me. Even though I was a successful basketball player, we have more doctors and lawyers and journalists coming out of our communities than we have basketball players and entertainers. So education is the way out. And at some point in time, we disconnected education and money. And we dropped education and put sports and entertainment equals money. That's not true. That's the fake out. And we have so many of our young youth lined up in the sports and entertainment line that this line for education, there's very few people standing in that line right now. And we need to move sports and entertainment back and put education here to equate with money. Because we understood very clearly when I was growing up, and the rock stars when I was growing up was Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Angela Davis. When they came to the community to speak, there were 20,000 people listening to them speak. And
your mom, you were going with your mom, and you were talking about at the dinner table,
and they would stop by the house and eat and everything else, and so hearing those conversations and seeing that type of activity and being a part of that made me clearly understand that mastering the English language and being able to speak about what's going on in your community and talk about it, that was my success model. The athlete, the entertainer was not my success model, nor was he any of ours. The posters that were on our wall, was of, the Malcolms and the Martins. Muhammad Ali became Muhammad Ali because of his humanitarian work and what he did outside of the boxing ring. Not because he was knocking people out. It's what he stood for. And that's what the athlete was always behind the educators. And what we've done in this society now is put the athlete and the entertainers before the educators. And the educators, that equates to money. I mean, that's, and so we just have to kind of reset the table here.
Speaking of resetting the table, you are continuing to set your table as you were sharing with us. You're getting your master's, or you're set to receive your master's, I think, this May. Am I correct?
If I finish writing this paper.
You got to get to your homework, right?
May 19th, I'm supposed to graduate, but I got a little work I got to do.
We won't put you on record for that, but it's coming. But tell us about that experience of, I think you even go to actual class. Isiah Thomas is flying back and forth, attending school at Berkeley. Tell me about that experience, sitting in the classroom still at this point in your career.
It's been awesome, and the first thing I say is, going back to school at Indiana and now going to Berkeley getting my master's.
And what are you specifically?
Education.
Education.
Cultural Studies of Sports and Education.
Wow, okay.
And, I'm not on scholarship.
So you paying it for
so I'm paying for the book, ain't no student loans, ain't no nothing, so this all coming out of pocket. But the investment that I've made in myself has really been awesome.
Besides just the legacy of basketball, Isiah Thomas the person, what do you do outside of when you're not focusing on basketball, when you're not focusing on, how do you wind down? How do you spend your time? Because you're busy. You're very busy doing a lot of things, but there has to be some downtime for Isiah Thomas.
Lately there hasn't been.
I'm taking it away from you, right?
I don't think I can afford to have downtime right now because, there is a state of crisis and a state of emergency in the black community surrounding the black male. And this is no time to have a let up or take a breath, because every time you take a breath, every time you let up, somebody's going to jail or somebody's dropping out of school or somebody's getting murdered. And those three things we got to stop.
What do you think is primarily the reason of what's going on in Chicago? And because that's one of, unfortunately, what's going on in your city right now. Some of the statistics coming out are some of the most horrific statistics in a while, but it's unfortunate. But what do you think are the reasons for this really happening? Is it just the poverty? Is it the gangs? What is some of it? We know that you're working on trying to help stop this, but what's going on right now?
Well, there will always be poverty in America. In this capitalistic society, poverty will exist, and that's just part of it. Now, poverty does not have to be wedded to drugs and weapons, and if we can divorce drugs and weapons from poverty, and give kids a chance to truly be educated, then they have a chance to move out of poverty. But when you put drugs and weapons on top of poverty, then you got a problem. Gangs, again, we can look at the gangs and say they're bad, they're this, and right now they are. But at one point in time in this country, they were good. And if we can get them back to that positive thought, and if we can give them just positive information, because I am confident of this, that if we can give all kids positive information, if we can arm them with the right information as opposed to arming them with weapons and drugs, I am positive that all kids will make correct decisions. That's what I'm positive of.
We can close with this. What advice would you give to someone like me, anyone in their community, male or female, that wants to make a difference? Because you're stepping up, doing the work. But maybe someone says, I don't know where to turn. I don't know where to go. What can they do, or where can they start? What advice?
Hey, you're doing it. The way we've progressed in this country is through our oral history, by telling stories, by communicating, by talking, by speaking truths. And you're doing it. You're writing. You're talking. Having a voice. It was a long time we didn't have a voice, and now we have a voice. And with that voice, it's important that we send the right messages. Right now, with the voice, we're not sending the right messages. All kids simply are not getting the right messages. And with this platform of sports and entertainment, imagine if we start sending positive messages as opposed to negative messages. That one switch will change everything, will change our community. If the sports and entertainment community said, no more negativity, it's all positivity. Michael Jackson, those entertainers back in the day, certain things they wouldn't say, certain things they wouldn't sing.
Wouldn't go there.
Yeah, certain sports players, certain things they just wouldn't say or do.
Well, look, we appreciate you and your time taken out, because you have a lot of things going on, and like I said, we appreciate you taking this time out with us, and we urge you to keep doing the work you're doing, because it is making a big difference. We're getting the testimonies coming back. And like we said, we wish you the best of luck with everything you're doing. And we hope to sit down with you again and maybe talk a little bit more hoops or basketball. But I think it's more important, as I said, the work you're doing now with education and outreach and youth. And we're going to get your message out there. So keep up the great work. And it's Isiah Thomas, Hall of Fame, N.B.A. great, but philanthropist, humanitarian, and soon to be a master's from UC Berkeley. But you got to do that paper.
Got to do that paper.
But thank you again for the time, and we look forward to sitting down with you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.